today we're going to talk about PCF, so the Power Apps Component Framework, in a way that's simple and focused on things that actually would matter when you're trying to build the application. My goal today is that you walk out of this room with a good understanding of exactly what PCF controls are, why they exist, and when you should use them, and what you need to build one from scratch, right? I'm going to do a live demo at the end, just so you actually see like the workflow and what actually building one would look like. The presentation will be a little more focused on the functional side of the PCFs, and I will discuss more around the model-driven apps, as that's where I have most experience with. And now, specifically, what will we learn today? So first thing is, what are the PCF controls? Why do they exist? The types, some practicalities and tips, and then, like I mentioned, the live demonstration. So the first thing, what are PCF controls? So PCF controls are custom UI components that behave like native Power Apps controls if you do them right. And they can run inside your model-driven apps and Canvas apps. They can read and write to Dataverse fields automatically. This is out of the box if you configure it. They look like part of the platform, and we'll get into this a little bit later if you use the correct library. And a perfect example of the reusal of the Power Apps controls is the PCF gallery that I showed here on the first slide. You can bundle them and distribute them to wherever you want, either that be a friend, a colleague, etc. So just so we situate ourselves, I wanted to show this UI that many of you may be familiar with, the model-driven app form editor. We will discuss this later in more detail, but just so we situate ourselves, this is where we add the components specifically for model-driven apps, whether Microsoft-made ones or the ones you create. So as you see down here, you would add your component, and the component we'll create will be added here. I prepared a simple model-driven app that we'll see later down the presentation. Now, why do they exist, right? We know what they are, but why do they exist? Because the default UI controls are not always enough. And I'm not sure if you guys face that problem, but I've faced that problem in the past, and PCFs come in to fill that gap. So we may see scenarios where some fields need smarter input, some experiences need visuals, not just text, and normally most out-of-the-box controls simply cannot meet everything you truly need for an application. That could be the case primarily on model-driven apps, because we know that they're model-driven, right? We don't control too much of the UI there. Now, just an extension of what I was talking here, these are 3 PCFs that I've built myself, and they are open source on PCF Gallery. I just wanted to walk through them a little bit and explain to you guys what was my thought process behind building them, just so you can get into the headspace of trying to find opportunities to also identify and see where you actually can use a PCF in your apps. So starting with the first one. This is a Fluent, I called it Fluent Year Picker. It's using the Fluent UI library, but essentially it's just a number field where I wanted the user to type in a year. But we have a problem specifically for model-driven apps where we only have a date and a time field, right? We don't have just a simple year field. And I didn't want the user to be just typing 2024, 2021. That could introduce human error, and it's not that pretty. Like, it's not that good of a user experience. So my thought process behind this, I'm going to create a PCF that blocks the user. And you can only select years, and I make it kind of look like a Power App, right? We use the Microsoft colors. It has the Fluent UI package that's used throughout the model-driven apps. So that was a little bit of my thought process behind that one. This one specifically is for an option set field, and the same thing. I didn't want to use the drop-down. I wanted something that showed all the options and the user could select them. I knew that there weren't many options in this use case, so I could just show them all of them at once. And I added a little hover animation. When you hover these, they hover, they're a little more modern. So it was just to enhance the experience once again. And this one, same thing, star rating PCF. This is placed on a number field, exactly the same as the Fluent Year Picker. But instead of the user, this was a little context, was for a performance review application. And instead of typing 5, 2.5, 3.5, we would have a star rating. It made more sense. It's cleaner, and it also gives like a more modern feel to the application. Right. So this, yeah, just to share a little bit the thought process behind building these simple PCFs to enhance the UI. Right. Now to continue expanding on what I was talking about. So when do they make sense? We already walked through a couple scenarios where they made sense for me. This is a little up to you and what you're dealing with in your applications. But the control job is to guide the user and not just store data. We saw this perfectly in these examples, right? We could have stored the data in a number field, in an option set, but we are enhancing the experience, right? We're not just storing data. So they could make sense when you're replacing or enhancing a single field. You need to show complex user interfaces like multiple lookups, trees, custom inputs. None of these are this complex use case, but you can really do whatever you want with them. Or you just want to do, like I mentioned, whatever you want with them. You can query, shape, render data. You can call the web API. You have the full power of the browser in the PCF. You can do anything. Front-end related, of course. Right. So now that we understand this, we need to also understand the types of PCFs. There's two types of PCFs. There's the field PCF. I have another example of the field PCF here. And all of these three PCFs I showed here are also field PCFs, for your understanding. Why are they field PCFs? Because they are placed on a field. Simple. And we also have dataset PCFs. I won't get into much detail in these because I do not use them as much. My experience revolves mainly around the field PCF. But just so you guys know that the field PCFs would enhance a single field, and the dataset PCF can enhance the grid. So you're not limited to fields only when you're using PCFs. Now, a little important concept about PCFs, and we'll have questions after, but I'll just go through them. There's something in the PCFs called the properties, and these properties can be bounded or unbounded. What do these mean? A bounded property simply means it's connected to a data field or a data set if you're using dataset PCF, but it's connected to a dataverse field. What does this mean? It means that it can read the value directly from it, and it can also write to it automatically, right? And this is perfect for editing and displaying real data. These PCFs here have a bounded property that matches the year field. This has a bounded property that matches the choice field I placed it on. This has a bounded property matching the rating field I placed it on. What does this mean? That when the user selects this star, that's the value for, it will get written automatically into Dataverse, right? And then we have unbounded properties. This is just a side, this is my opinion, but if you're doing unbounded properties, you could, in theory, just go with web resources, because if you don't need to be bounded or grabbing information directly from any field, there's really no reason why you should be limiting yourself or using PCFs, right? But you can have combinations, and that's why we have a plus here. An unbounded property would mean that you just have a user input that's not necessarily tied to a Dataverse field. It does not read or update automatically. You would need to do this, for example, via the web API or externally. And essentially just works as a standalone component, right? If you don't want to place it or attach it to anything it's there, you just want it to be there by itself, you can also do that. Here I have an example that we briefly saw at the beginning. This property here, so the property field would be bounded. So this is bounded to this field. And then we have an unbounded property that just expects a static value. So it's not binded to anything. You can just type in whatever you want. We'll get into more detail when we move to the live demo. Right. So right now, some practical don'ts. These are just my opinion, but the PCF should be lightweight, right? They're meant to expand the product, not replace it. So you should not overload it with too much logic. Ideally, you shouldn't break the visual flow of the form. And what I mean here by a mini website is they need to be lightweight, right? They need to fulfill a precise requirement. They need to do what they need to do. So they should simplify, they should not complicate. Now, some security considerations regarding PCF. So to take into account that the PCF is client-side, right? The users can see the bundle if they're technical. So storing secrets or sensitive information in your PCF, it's not usually ideal. If you handle authentication, you should handle authentication in a backend or in a separate service. Because, like I mentioned, PCFs run on the browser. Now, if you wanted to build a PCF, now that you have more or less of an idea of what PCFs are, if you needed to build a PCF, what would you need to have installed? These are the core tools. So Node.js, so the Node Package Manager, PackCLI, this is the Power Platform command line tool, and a code editor of your choice. I use VS Code and I will use VS Code for the demonstration. There's also this tool in the XRM toolbox. I have not used it, but I know people who use it. If you don't like running commands in the terminal, you can use this tool, just a tiny note, so you guys know. Now, I talked about the Power Platform command line interface, but just so you guys know, we can do a lot of things with the Power Platform command line interface, but the core commands we'll look at is creating a PCF project, building it, and then pushing it to the environment. Now, we're talking about the PackCLI. Now we also need to talk about what are the most common commands, or the commands we'll particularly use in the demo, that we need to know. So we have the authentication command. This is PAC, so the Power Platform command line tools that lets us call the functionality of the command line. We have the authentication that lets us create authentication for an environment, and then we list the authentications. I will already have the authentication created for me, just so we don't lose time on that front. After we have the authentication, we'll need to create a PCF project. We can use this command, so it's pack PCF init. You just pass in a namespace. I usually use the same as my publisher, and the name of the control. And then remember that we said that we have multiple types of PCFs. You can just select the template. In our case, we'll use the field template. After this is done, you will need to install all your packages. So you just run npm install. npm is the Node Package Manager tool I mentioned here. After everything is installed, you can build it, see if everything compiles successfully. Before you deploy it, you should, or it depends on your workflow, but I usually test it locally just to see if everything is fine. You can run npm start watch to spin up a local environment of your PCF, so you don't need to be deploying it. You can just do the most validation locally and then send it over to your environment. And then to send it over to your environment, you have the pack PCF push. You have to define the publisher prefix you want your PCF to use. Normally, I just use the one I'm using for my solution. So these are the most important commands, or the base commands that you need to build and execute PCF controls. So what's my workflow, right? What do I usually do when creating a PCF? First, I have a problem. I have a way or an idea how to fix it. After I do that, I create a project with the pack PCF init. I rename the unbounded properties. Remember that we said the properties are an important part, and I'll touch on this again, but just to reinforce, once we know where we want to place the PCF, it's important that we also map it to the properties, or what fields / properties the PCF will be in. And then we write our logic, what we want the PCF to do. We build and push. We apply the control to the field. And this is just a tiny loop, right? We keep doing this until we are happy with our result. Now, if we wanted to do a simple demo, just to share, I have this model-driven app here that I prepared for the demonstration. It has a table called classes. I created a class called class1, and it has this field difficulty. And let's assume we have a problem. So the problem is that I want that whenever a user types in the difficulty of the class, for example, hard, I want that the word hard turns red, medium would turn the word medium to yellow, and after the user types this is an easy class, it would become green. So we now know that we need a PCF, field PCF, because it will be placed in this field. It will be bounded to this field called difficulty, because I want to read data from it automatically and write to it if necessary. So what we'll do is in this step here, like I mentioned, we have a text input called difficulty, and this is the requirement. We want to achieve this result. Easy green, medium yellow, hard red. And to save the value back to database. So now in this step, we know what bounded property we need. We need a bounded property for the field difficulty. Now, before I jump into actually executing the PCF, whenever you initialize the PCF, I just want to run through what files you'll see, just a little bit of context. The PCF project always contains, when you run the pack PCF init, it contains the definition of the PCF, so the control manifest input. This is where you define your bounded and unbounded properties. We'll do that live. The index.ts file, it's the controls logic. It's where you actually can write the code of your control. The generated manifest types, so this file here, it's what gets generated after you build your PCF. So what gets generated here is based on your definition. So quick example, what we'll do in the demonstration, the first thing we'll do is go to the control manifest and define a bounded property for the difficulty field that we already know want to place a PCF on. Then I'll build. And what will that do? That will regenerate my manifested types with the difficulty property correct, right? And after that, I'll start writing the code. This point here is just to let you know that you can really just do, besides these core things, you can just organize your code base as whatever you want. You can create folders, services, features, whatever you see fit. And the package.json is just the dependency management for Node. Right. So what I'll do now is I'll jump over to VS Code. So we can start doing our PCF. Right, so I'm here. We have empty folder called Powercademy, and I'm here in the terminal. I'm not sure if it's big enough for you guys, but do let me know if you need me to zoom in. So the first thing I'll do is I'll just create a folder called Powercademy PCF demo. I'll just navigate to that folder. And now I'll run the command we just talked about. So we need to initialize the project. So I'll run pack PCF init. We'll do namespace. I'm going to call it Exodia because it's the publisher of my solution. And then the name of the control. So we'll call it Powercademy difficulty control. And we'll use the template portal, right? So I'm going to execute this. And you see it successfully dropped the project structure in this folder. So if I open this folder, we now have the code I just briefly showed you on the presentation. Just to go over the code again. Remember, I said that we have the control manifest input file. You'll see that a lot of code here is already commented out. This is a way of Microsoft helping you understand where you need to do stuff. It has examples of property types. It has examples of resources you could add. And it has a list of all the features you would use. But like I mentioned, the most important thing to me at this precise moment are these properties. I'll just minimize this a little bit. The properties is where the PCF will be bound to. So the first thing I would do, or that I usually do, is I know that this is bounded to the difficulty field. So the first thing I need to do is define a property for the difficulty field, right? So difficulty field. I'll just copy this. I'll just change the display name and the description key. The difficulty field is of type single line of text. Nothing needs to change there. And it's bound, right? Because I want to read data from it directly. This was already kind of all set up for us, right? We didn't have to do much. Now, one important thing that I almost forgot is we need to run npm install to install the packages for Node. So we'll just run npm install. You'll see that by any minute now, it should be installed. While that's installing, I can show you that since we didn't build yet, and we go to the generated manifest types, you can see that it's still referencing the sample property that was here before, right? So only after I build will these get regenerated and will get regenerated and match the actual properties that we have in our control manifest. So now what I'll do exactly that. So we have our node modules installed. I'll do npm run build. Sorry, run builds. So now that the project has built itself, if we go back to manifest the generated types, you can see that the property is now the one we define, right? So now we have the base thing to start. We know where to place the PCF. It's on the difficulty field. We know it's a bounded property. We just defined it. We installed the node modules, and we rebuilt the project so the generated types also match what we want. And now what's left for us to do is to go to the index. Like I mentioned, there's a lot of useful comments that you can read through that Microsoft helps you understand what these are, but the index.ts is where you would either point to your logic or write your logic directly inside of here. Since this is basic PCF, I already prepared a code snippet for this functionality that I'll drop in. Going to save. And you can see that the structure remains more or less intact. We keep the same init, destroy, the update, and the render. You may see that this is throwing an error, and we can try to understand why. If we hover the error, we see that we expect the difficulty property to be, and if we go to the manifested types in the generated folder, we can see that the difficulty property has an uppercase D, right? So that's why it's telling me, and this is the beauty of TypeScript, it tells me it's going to fail before it fails. So we just change this to fix it. So what we would do now, let me just clear the console because it's getting a mess. We would now build it again, right, to see if everything is fine. Does not match. Okay, we have another problem. Let's fix it. Powercademy difficulty control. So if we go to our index and we see our control name. Yeah, so here it's Powercademy control. I believe that we need to change this. Right, so it built successfully. The problem here is that the metadata was not matching what I had in the index.ts file. So I just matched the names to everything is consistent. So We have now built the PCF. We've added our logic index. We defined the properties in control manifest. We built it so the properties are in the manifested types, and we use these manifested types in our logic. The next step now would be to deploy this, right? We saw some commands to do this. Everything is building successfully like we saw. So the next command I would do is spec auth who to know what environment am I targeting, right? This is my sandbox environment, so everything seems correct. This is my user. So now what I would do is run the pack PCF push command. So I would do pack PCF push. Remember, we have to add the publisher prefix, and the prefix in this particular environment is Exodium. So I'm going to do this now to push the PCF to the environment. You can see that it automatically checks if the PCF is already there to update it or create it. And now we'll wait for it to finish. I'll switch my screen share to the Power Apps editor.
And Nuno, is this the place where it's going to take a minute to publish?
Correct. Yeah, I think we could handle one or two questions while this is deploying and while I change over to
awesome.
Power Apps.
Amazing. Sounds good. So does anyone have any questions? Since there's not a lot of us, I'm happy for anyone to just come off mute and ask.
Yeah, feel free to ask any questions. I'll try my best to answer you.
So would an unbounded one be, like an example, be something like, say, filter fields that you have at the top or something to filter out, say, a list?
For example, yeah. So let's say you actually wanted a perfect example like this difficulty field. Let's say you want it bound to the field, but you want to define the colors yourself. You don't want to have them hard-coded in the code. So you could just define three unbounded properties called red Xcode. So the Xcode for red, yellow Xcode, and green Xcode. What that would do, you would just need in your code, check what value did the user paste in when the PCF is deployed, right? I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yep.
So Nuno, in that way, what would happen is basically rather than it being bounded to the field, it's just reading the field through the logic. So it's not bounded to it, but it's reading it and determining the color based on that. Is that correct?
This example I gave is a mix between a bounded property and an unbounded. So it's bounded to the difficulty field, so we can read and write what's there. So hard, medium, or whatever value user types in. And then we created another unbounded property for this same PCF that's just a text field that the user can fill in or not. And this bounded property is bounded. We don't touch that. But we added another unbounded property that lets the user, when deploying the PCF, say, hey, I want to use this specific green, right? I'm not sure if this is making sense, but once this is deployed, I can show it better. And in this example,
it's awesome.
So in this example, this is an example where we use a bounded property, difficulty, bounded to difficulty field, and an unbounded property where we just pass in this case, it's just this configuration URL, but it could be anything you want.
I see.
So in your code, you can say, hey, I'm already bounded to difficulty. Everything is fine there. I can read and write the field. But I also want the user to be able to tell me when he actually places the PCF on the model-driven app, I want the user to be able to tell me what's the URL, right? Or what's the Xcode, or what's X, Y, and Z.
I see. So the unbounded property would be configurable through the end user on the model-driven app form.
Exactly.
I understand. Okay, got you.
And just another thing on Wayne's question. If you were truly to do fully unbounded, so let's say you don't even want to bound to the difficulty field, you just want to have three properties here that you fully define yourself. That's where I think, and it's just my opinion, that would be best to go with web resources, right? Because you're not fully taking advantage of the PCF touching and interacting with Power Apps directly. So if you were to go fully unbounded, you can just do a web resource, and I think it would simplify everything a lot, right? Because it's just JavaScript. You don't need to handle all of these property types and Power Apps things. So yeah, this is just my opinion. It is what I usually do. Yeah, I'm not sure if Richard has any question, or if you have any other question.
My question is that we were dealing about the difficulties, and it has a sub properties like the hard, medium, and a small. But so after this, where are you going to add it?
The PCF.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the PCF, property like the hard, the small, and the medium.
Yeah. So currently, just to explain, we have this field here. It's a string field, right? So what the PCF is doing is reading the value that's on this field. So if the PCF it needs to be smart enough to know if the value typed in here is easy, the easy should be green, right? It's everything we're checking. We're just checking what's the string there. If the string equals easy, green. Equals medium,
green.
Yellow,
then hard, red.
Yeah, exactly. We'll see that in action. I'm already looking at the logs, and it seems like it's been published. So I'm just going to go here, add existing. If you want to add a PCF control, also for information, just go to add existing, more, developer, custom control. I'm just going to type my prefix here. Here's my control, Exodia, Powercademy difficulty control.
So Nuno,
remember,
using the pack CLI, you sent this into Power Apps into your specific environment, and now because of that, you can access it through the solution, correct?
Exactly.
Understood.
So the command we just ran, so the pack PCF push, and with the correct authentication, you send it over to your environment. And then you can add it to your solution and just do the normal version control ALM stuff from there.
Super intuitive.
So now that
But if we weren't building one, but we got it off the gallery, we just come and do the add, right? We wouldn't do the push.
In that specific scenario, you would probably need to import their solution. So let's actually go to PCF gallery so I can show you. So let's say you love this clock. This is the coolest clock you've seen in your life. So you could just go here, click download. This, I suspect it will take you to a GitHub. And you can see here that most people who open source things on PCF gallery, and mine included, leave things in a solution, right? So you just grab their solution or their control. You would need to import it yourself in your environment. And once you import it in your environment, you would be able to then do the same thing, more developer and custom control. Okay. So what we've done, we built our own and we deployed directly. But if you were to use something that other people installed, it's probably going to be in a solution that you need to import.
Okay.
All right. So we have our PCF. It's been deployed. It's here. Now we need to go edit, right? That's the big important part. Now I'm just going to refresh this screen. Okay, we know we want to place it on the difficulty field, right? Yes. So we would click the difficulty field. Remember we saw this screen right at the beginning of the presentation, and where we have this components tab under here. So if we click components, you should see a couple of list components. Ours is not here. Why? Because we need to click get more components. We should click built by others because it was built by us, not Microsoft. And we'll just wait for it a bit to load. As you can see here, here's our Powercademy difficulty control, right? So we should add it to the options here. And now I can select the control. I'm going to select the control, click done, and sooner or later it will show up here. So now we have this custom input. That's our input. I'm going to save and publish. And remember, the expected behavior is if I type easy, the word easy becomes green, and so on. So let's just wait for Power Apps to do its thing. And as soon as it's published, we will go back to our model-driven app. Just a quick curiosity, Microsoft themselves uses Power Apps component framework to build these components you see here, the out-of-the-box ones that you can already use. So this is really a framework that you can take leverage on, that Microsoft uses themselves. Not sure if you are familiar with Dynamics 365 applications. They're essentially just big model-driven apps with a lot of customization on top. And a lot of that stuff is done with PCF controls. But yeah, great. So it's already saved and published. We can go back to our model-driven app. I'm just going to refresh it here as well, just so we see the new PCF control. All right. It's working great because I already had the easy word there. But let's actually change it to medium.
Yeah.
And it's yellow, right? If we do red, sorry,
Yeah.
my brain is not working really well. If we do hard, it's going to do red. Yeah, it's not the other way around. All right, so this was more or less the idea of the PCFs. If we type anything else, we don't do anything else. We don't have logic for it. So we could add it. We can really do whatever we want here. So you guys are let go of your creativity. Just do whatever you feel like.
Okay.
Damn it. Hard. No one saw that. All right. Not sure if you guys have any questions. I can go back to the presentation, the codes, anything you would like to clarify.
Thank you for that, Nuno. Firstly, from me, that was a great presentation. One of my favorite that we've had on there. So it's a shame not a lot of people could catch it live. Again, hoping they catch the recording. And honestly, it was so valuable. I'm actually thinking about putting it on YouTube so other people can get the value from it too. But yeah, just a couple questions from me.
Sure.
You had a slide on there around the potential drawbacks, or I think it was called practical don'ts. The slide, yeah, exactly, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some of the consequences of if you do these things? Like if you overload a form with too much PCF logic, etc. Like what are some of the consequences of overdoing this?
Yeah. So the first thing of overloading a form would be just the lag, right? Because you already have to load everything that's low code, right? And you're adding your code on top of it. So what does this mean? You're adding extra logic. Extra logic takes more time to load. And if you write really complex logic, let's just give a practical example where our difficulty field had to connect to another table to know something X, Y, and Z. Those are web API calls that you opening the form and triggering the PCF would trigger, right? So you're adding stuff on top. I always say that writing code is bad, as stupid as this may seem. Like code you write is code you have to maintain, right? So the least code you write, the least code you have to maintain. So the easier is to manage the platform, because right now, if Microsoft changes something on the model-driven apps forms, it's on their side to fix it, right? If you write code on top of the model-driven app, it's on your side to fix it. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
No.
it kind of touches a little bit to the mini website, right? If your PCF is that complex, maybe we should start thinking about other options and solutions.
Yeah,
right?
no, for sure. No, that definitely answers my question. And yeah, I mean, if anyone has completed the Pro Code module, which is module 4, the extensions and model-driven apps, you would know always low code first. And as Nuno has attained to, when you do low code, and again, Nuno, as you said, you pawn off the work to Microsoft. They're effectively managing the infrastructure, and that is a big reason why people pay for Dynamics in the first place. But as soon as you start adopting that responsibility, it's on you to maintain it as the architect, as the developer. That's awesome. And then final question, just because I know people are going to be asking it, what is your opinion on vibe coding PCF controls? Have you ever tried it? Do you have any recommendations? Don't do it, do it. Like, what's your opinion on a non-programmer getting into this stuff?
I mean, I think you can definitely do it. I've tried it myself. I use, in terms of AI augmented code, I use Warp and Codex a lot. So those are the tools I mainly use.
Yeah.
And I think it's easier to vibe code a PCF than a full web app because it's such a tiny controlled thing. The only thing I do notice when you try to do it is, since the Power Apps knowledge is kind of niche, right? The AI agents don't pick it up that easily. So if you, like, simple example, if you were to write a normal JavaScript or React application, there's documentation to go over for years, right? The agent could like pick everything up really fast. Now, if you ask the agent to do something really Power Apps PCF specific, you might need to give it some input and say, hey, you shouldn't do things this way. You should do it this way and this way, because it doesn't know. There's not enough information on it for it to be trained on, like out of the box trained on, if I'm making sense.
No, for sure.
But you can definitely do it. You just need to babysit it a little more, I would say.
Yeah, understood. Understood, yeah. And I think a good use case for that, or a good example, is, for example, if you're doing web resources or JavaScript on model-driven app forms, just for everyone's benefit, execution context is something that you have to pass in the beginning. So if you don't actually do that, then it can be a little bit, it can be problematic, and then ChatGPT or something doesn't recognize the execution context. So yeah, it's a bit of a niche. So sometimes it just gives you generic stuff, which is something we're trying to solve. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that. Okay, so that's my
similar
question.
to. Oh, sorry, I was just going to say that's similar to what I've found when I was doing some JSON formatting for SharePoint. Was when I tried it in Copilot, it gave me the stuff, but it kept on erroring. And as soon as I turned on the ChatGPT, asked it again, and all of a sudden, here's the solution. So it was like, obviously it was limited in what it was trying to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would say if you're doing JavaScript, and I say it in the course, I have a custom GPT, which I like put instructions. I'm not going to sit here and talk it up like I put tons of hours of effort into it. I didn't. I downloaded the documentation from Microsoft. I put it in. I told the instructions not to look at anything else that's crazy and just to reference that. And it works quite well. So the GPT's in the course as well. It's free, so you can use it online if you have GPT Pro, I think it is. But yeah, it's there are nuances because the Power Platform is still a bit of a niche. So when you have to get around that, but yeah. Okay. Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, I got one. If it's okay.
Altit, of course, please.
Of course.
Yeah. If I need to build a schedule board, which is the best way to do it in model-driven app? Because as I understand, if I need to build a schedule board.
A schedule board, yes.
The schedule board, yeah. Yeah. What is the best way to do it in model-driven app?
Actually, so that would be like a full screen, right? That schedule, no?
Yeah.
I mean, what I would do there, you don't need to do a PCF. What I would do, it's maybe, I'm not sure if it's more advanced or less advanced, but you can build like a web resource, right? And you can add the web resource to the model-driven app. So if you come here, let me just open the app so I can show you. So where you have the button here called Add Page, you have many options. So you actually have a low-code option for that. So you would just create a custom page, build it in the Canvas model, the Canvas editor thingy, and just add the custom page here. That would be like the low-code option. If you want to go pro-code option, you can just add a web resource, and you can just create a full web resource that does everything you need, right? I've been exploring something that's, it's actually was firstly done, I believe, by Ricardo Gregory, so this is not credit to me, but I saw his work on it. to actually embed a React application into a web resource. And I've been doing this lately, and it's really cool. So essentially, you can have like a fully custom React application inside your model-driven app. So you would have these two options if you want to have a fully custom screen, low-code custom page, or pro-code web resource, right? Okay. And if you want to expand a form, let's say you almost got the scheduling screen like you wanted for like in the model-driven. You could maybe add a PCF just to extend that tiny part. But if you're just doing it from scratch, I would recommend custom page or web resource.